I do research in the area of water resources. Now, many of you may think about water as a precious commodity, a precious resource, especially in the southwestern US. This is a true statement. And then how do you take the research that one does in an academic setting related to water and put it to good use, whether it's in the industrial sector or in a government agency or maybe an international body, such as the United Nations. So I have my own little personal stories of putting knowledge into use within society that I will share as we walk through our faculty panel. So with that as an example, a model to follow, I'd like to give the floor over to my colleague, Dr. Laurie Mook.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation to talk about knowledge mobilization, which is near and dear to my heart. I am an associate professor in the School of Community Resources and Development, and I work in an area called social accounting with social economy organizations, which include nonprofits, cooperatives, credit unions, and social enterprises. So a lot of the research that I've been involved in is what we would call community university research alliances, working with community organizations around questions of importance to them, but also of interest to us in the academic world. I have been a co-director of a research center that heavily emphasized knowledge mobilization, so that was always a very important part of the research processes that we addressed and included in terms of budgets and goals and so forth, this aspect of knowledge mobilization, which would take the knowledge that we have co-created together and make sure that it is accessible to a wide audience, make sure that it is useful as well, and then also to continue that work and continue innovating together. So that's just a little bit about me and my work.
Thank you, Laurie. And we'll get to the details here in a second. I'd like to introduce next Dr. Flavio Marciglia.
Thank you, Enrique. Hello, everyone. I'm Flavio. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work, and also I'm the director of a research center. It's called the Global Center for Applied Health Research. And my research portfolio is divided in two parts. One is local in the Southwest US, and the other part is global, international. But in both areas, what we do is a lot of research on health disparities, health equity. The idea is to make sure that people from different communities have equal access to good care, and that we also integrate all the assets that come from community and culture to keep people healthy. And within communities, we tend to work mostly with young people and children and youth and their parents. And we do a lot of what we call intervention research. We identify with community unmet needs, and then with them, we developed an intervention to address that need. And then we usually use randomized controlled trials to assess the efficacy of that intervention. And we are now working with partners in 14 other countries outside of the US. But the main country in terms of the size of our portfolio and involvement is Mexico. Good to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Flavio. I think the word randomized control trials has become very popular in our recent lexicon, right?
Right.
And our final panelist for today, Dr. Elizabeth Wentz, I'd like to introduce her and have her share a little bit of her background.
Thank you, Enrique, for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak sort of as a faculty member at this particular event. The area of research, I'm a geographer by training, and I do a lot of work with with maps and data. And it's become very important and very clear to me that people are really aiming to use data, geographic data, map data for better decision making. But a lot of times the organizations within the community, they've got a lot of really talented individuals for collecting the data, but they run out of bandwidth. They get to the point where they don't necessarily know how to take it to the next level to really use it for analysis. So, for example, one of the organizations that I'm partnering with is the Maricopa Association of Governments. They're a very data-heavy organization, and they are expected, I don't know if it's by the state or by the county or by whom, to collect certain kinds of data and make sure that analyses are done that are fairly long-term looking. They're very long looking in terms of their projections. So they have trouble making nimble, quick analyses and decisions. And so recently with a project that I have funded to look at community resilience, which is the ability for a community to withstand shocks and long-term stresses, they have not been able to really pivot to really address some of the critical issues around the COVID-19 pandemic. And so recently we ran what is called an agent-based model that looks at what is the relationship between evictions that are happening, the moratorium on evictions, and the relationships to jobs and job security. And we ran this model to best understand what happens if the moratorium on evictions is lifted too soon and the job market has not returned to enough of a level. What's going to happen to evictions and homelessness? And so they've been able to take the Arizona Housing Authority has been able to take our agent-based model, which is based on data from the Maricopa Association of Governments, and have conversations and questions about policy decisions on when to lift the moratorium, because it's kind of this cross. You've got to get to a point where the jobs are such so that when the moratorium on evictions is listed, people can actually have the resources to pay their bills. So that's been a really exciting project that we've been very deeply a part of, and really hoping to have this benefit the community in Maricopa County as we build back from the pandemic.
That was great. I mean, look at what we have here. The pandemic has given us an example of how university research can impact society, and how what we do has saliency and immediacy. And so the three panelists thus far do work in health and community organizations and spatial maps. Speaking about maps, hasn't our geographical knowledge just exploded during the last year? How many maps have you been looking at? World maps, county maps, national maps, and the visualizations online on websites are becoming more and more sophisticated. So this is really an opportunity for us in academia. And when I say academia, I mean you, graduate students and researchers and postdocs and faculty members, to take what we do, and in addition to publishing in our peer-reviewed journals and participating in our scientific conferences and engaging with our organizations, we also take the extra step of making the material as useful as possible to others. And that means stretching our own capabilities, learning new techniques that we might not have considered before. So this is the spirit of this faculty panel, to show you through these great panelists that knowledge mobilization is an activity that we can all do. The earlier you start doing, the better. In my case, it took me 15 years or so to be able to translate the academic knowledge into a societal impact. And you all that are part of this program, this awards program, you're doing it from the beginning. What a wonderful thing. And us faculty members represented here are also starting to learn how to do it. Some are more advanced than others. So that's the spirit for today. We have about 25 minutes or so left of our panel, and we will obviously take questions that you might have through the Q&A. So what we'll do, we have some guiding questions for our panelists, and we'll do a little bit of conversation around these questions. The first one is around what advantages has this mindset of knowledge mobilization, of applied research, what advantages has it had for your research group, your research career, your scientific or professional standing? I'll start with Flavio.
Thank you, Enrique. In my case and my team, having this approach has helped us to really be a little bit more humble in our approach to research. I think sometimes the way we were trained, and I'm talking about people of my generation, you know, the idea was we needed to be objective, we needed to be, you know, very pragmatic, we needed to, you know, maintain distance from the subjects that we were working with, or the communities in our case. And in a way, we have stopped doing that and saying, you know, we need to work together and we need to be co-investigators with our community partners. And that make us be much more open to innovation, because our community partners are the experts about their needs, and also they're the experts about their solutions. Then to, of course, use what we know as academics and maybe contribute the methods to achieve certain goals, but not to define the research question from our academic, you know, a smaller world, but in dialogue with community, identify those research questions and then together do it. To give you a quick example, similar to Libby, we had to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think all of us have been affected and continues to be affected by it. Then we have a large center grant on health disparities research funded by NIH, and they told us that we were eligible to apply for a supplement, a big supplement, to work on COVID-19, to make testing accessible to communities that had less access to testing. And in our case in Arizona, it meant American Indian, Latinx, and African American communities. And then some of my colleagues said, but Flavio, that's a service grant. It's not a research grant. And then that, in a way, those colleagues who spoke like that came from the old-fashioned, you know, old school. And there's an opportunity here to be, but also to advance knowledge. And then we develop a survey, and we are now implementing this longitudinal study with everybody who tested positive. And then we are learning how they did it in terms of staying healthy and protecting themselves and others, what resources, what worker approach, how useful the community health worker in that process. And we think all that knowledge will help us to be better prepared for the next pandemic, because sadly enough, there will be another one of these. Then I think we had to stop separating service and research. That's what we have learned from this approach. We are all the same people, and we need to, our knowledge should help to improve the quality of life of communities. Then it's not two separate trains that are running parallel to each other. It's the same train. And that's what I would like to conclude with. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Flavio. So service and research coming together. I hadn't heard it articulated in that way. And I think that's a very nice way of thinking about knowledge mobilization. We have a panelist who's arrived, Gustavo Fischman here. And Gustavo, we are working through the advantages that knowledge mobilization and applied research has provided to your research career, your group, your standing in your community, your impact on society. So I'll let you chime in here and say a little bit about yourself first, and then sort of what advantages has this had for you?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation and sharing the panel. It's great to be at ASU where knowledge mobilization is taken seriously. I'm Gustavo Fischman, the professor of education policy at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I'm originally from Argentina, and I do research on areas of scholarly communication, knowledge mobilization, open access, being involved in specifically knowledge mobilization for the last 10 years. And the advantages of knowledge mobilization, it allows me to look in the mirror every morning and feel that the ethical commitment that professors, researchers, knowledge workers that work in a public university can meet through knowledge mobilization the ethical commitment that we have with the public. Our salaries, our research, our projects are financed by the public, and we have the obligation to make that knowledge as accessible, as engageable as possible to the public. I agree with Flavio, this distinction between research and service is an artifact of a tradition that assumes that we are the only ones that produce knowledge, and that we have the solutions to the problems that we also identify. Knowledge mobilization allows you for a more engageable type of science where you collaborate with others. And that's the nature of the scientific, scholarly, social, political, environmental problems that we are facing today. Nobody can do these things alone. And the better we communicate with multiple stakeholders, the better we meet the ethical commitment of returning and making our knowledge accessible, but also the problems will be more realistic, the solutions will be more feasible. I think knowledge mobilization is a win-win, and is scholarly more relevant. So that's an advantage for me.
Thank you. That's great, Gustavo. And hopefully, as the participants that are listening to these recommendations and this advice are taking note why knowledge mobilization resonates with ASU as an institution, with our charter, okay, with our ethical responsibility to society. Mm-hmm. I'd like to shift a little bit because knowledge mobilization is hard. It sounds easy, but it's hard. So we've all, as faculty, confronted barriers to being able to do this type of research. I've had barriers related to cultural barriers. When you take knowledge from the US and you move it to another country, some things get lost in translation. Okay, so perhaps Dr. Wentz, you can speak a little bit about some barriers that you might have confronted in this journey that you've had in your career.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, certainly a lot of the knowledge mobilization work that I have engaged in is really the attempt to have a co-creation of knowledge with the community partners that I'm working with. And so it's really about not necessarily bestowing the knowledge that I have generated onto the community for their service, but really understanding, you know, what it is that their needs are so that we can be reciprocal in the work. I think that I would add in the teaching piece as well to sort of the commitment. So there's the service and the research, but the teaching piece, and that the teaching piece is also goes both ways. I found that the community partners that I'm working with teach me a lot about what's going on in practice and things that I don't know about because I'm not handling those things on a day-to-day basis. And so I think there's a co-knowledge exchange between the community partners. The challenge that I face with that is that and Enrique's office is right next to mine, and I can hear my voice echoing back into my office, which is really, really unnerving.
Hi, Libby.
Hello back there. But the co-creation of knowledge is challenging because as academics, our reward system is based on journal article publications. And we have worked very hard to partner with community partners to have their input, but their incentive system is not necessarily set up to be working with, writing journal articles. They've been gracious and appreciative and of participating, but we always have to keep in mind that the reward systems for the community partners that we have are different. And sometimes it feels like we have to do something extra in order to sort of maintain sort of our credibility within academia, and then being respectful of the work that they're doing.
That's a great point. The incentive structures are different between academic settings and the communities that we're trying to impact. And there might be other things that are different. Vocabulary, just getting through the vocabulary that one uses in one's field. And maybe that person like me is also a hydrologist, but they're in the field working on something different, using different vocabulary. Dr. Mook, can you comment on some barriers that you have seen and maybe overcome and how to overcome them?
Sure, yes, and that is a great question and great insights so far from everyone. So in my doctoral studies, I was trained, I guess, in community university research alliances, not so much discipline specific. So I feel I had a bit of a step up there in terms of understanding that approach. But still, as Libby was saying, it's seen as an extra, this knowledge mobilization aspect, and comes back to Flavio's point about the separation between research and service. Sometimes that, it's really the integration of research and service in this way. For instance, I'm an editor of a research to practice column for a professional journal where I, every quarter look for current research and try to sort of translate that and make that, figure out what is actually a useful applied knowledge. And those types of things are kind of seen extra to what, my academic publishing and so forth. And I've been listing it under service, but it's also connected to research. So there's that divide. The tenure and promotion practices for sure, again, it's how we're evaluated. ASU is this wonderful place with the charter and so forth, but external evaluators may not recognize that so much. So they have been brought up in a different context. But I think the charter really does attract folks that want to make a difference, that want to be socially embedded, that are inclusive. And instituting this knowledge mobilization awareness through the graduate college is perfect because we're going to be creating new researchers, from a new generation of researchers that can incorporate this thinking as they're doing research, as they're reading research. Knowledge mobilization is, in terms of the community, is also a way of democratizing the knowledge and even to a certain extent decolonizing it. We're making it accessible to a wider group, and we're including folks in that creation of knowledge. So I guess the challenges also are resource-based in terms of having the resources, even financial resources, to do knowledge mobilization. So it's really important to think about that as folks are putting in their grants to include some component in the budget and attention to knowledge mobilization. And even through ASU, there's still a lot, I think, that we can do in terms of setting up a knowledge mobilization sort of focus or unit with knowledge mobilization officers and so forth, even providing training for that community members and faculty and students all take together in terms of learning about knowledge mobilization and then working together to actually do it. We've got our continuing and professional development arm of the university, so perhaps there could be some sort of workshops set up. But so those types of resources, I think, would help facilitate and help us achieve also acknowledging our impact in terms of social embeddedness. That is so important to us at ASU.
Thank you, Dr. Mook. And how do you do knowledge mobilization? You know, is there a recipe? What has worked in your case? What hasn't worked in your case? I'm sure that across the 5 of us, we've tried many things, and some of them have fallen flat on their face, and others have actually led us down a very productive collaboration. And those productive collaborations have led to a question that you didn't even know was important. And then you reoriented your work toward that societally relevant question. So the last piece of our panel is in this spirit. What sort of recommendations would you all, as faculty members across many units here at ASU, we have representation of many disciplines. What are your recommendations for students, some of them who are listening to us today that are developing their projects or they've completed a project? How do we do this? Where do we get resources? In that spirit. So I will give the floor here to Gustavo, and go ahead.
Well, the easy question, how to do it. The first suggestion is, don't think about knowledge mobilization that is something that starts at the end of the project. Once you collected the data and you have your analysis and you have just a question, how I disseminate my knowledge. That is dissemination, it's not knowledge mobilization. So knowledge mobilization is a plan that a set of strategies, practices that involve the potential users of the knowledge that is going to be produced. So involve the potential users, have conversations with those stakeholders, if you want, from the beginning. Make a plan. Think about those audiences that you want to engage, and remember that each audience, each stakeholder group will use different languages. So just having the article posted in ResearchGate is wonderful, but it's not enough. And the third one is collaborate. None of us is that good at writing articles, thinking about the grants, speaking in public, doing workshops, making graphic, appealing PowerPoint presentations, do the podcast. The graduate college is a great resource as you have all these workshops. But it would be great if the university could have institutionally support for lots of people, where graphic designers, podcast producers, people that work on visualizations, editors, script writers. If we can collaborate with that, we will mobilize institutionally the resources for a lot of people and learn with the practice. I think that those are the 3 things that I will do. Engage early, don't do it alone, and ask for support with the institution. The institution has, I'm not complaining, ASU is doing a lot, but your consolidation of these multiple, sometimes duplicated services that we have will be great. And finally, open access, open science. That's, don't buy into open access is less quality. and open science is the science of the 21st century too.
Very nicely said, Gustavo. Thank you. And we have about 5 minutes left in our panel. So I'd like to give the opportunity to 2 more panelists to speak on this. And feel free to volunteer. Those of you that have something to say around recommendations for our students.
I can pop in just quickly, but I think in terms of students, bring it into the conversations you have as you're discussing your research. So, you might be meeting in thesis groups or other types of groups, but continue this awareness and discuss amongst yourselves and how you might envision incorporating, especially as you're starting out, how you might envision incorporating knowledge mobilization within your own projects. Also, as you're reading research, think about the knowledge mobilization aspect. If you could you envision what that might be as you're reading research and preparing for your own research. So I would just say, like, continue bring it out into the open and talk about it, learn about it, and discuss ideas.
I can add something quickly. Thank you, Laurie. I would suggest that we need to start with a community advisory board to be sure that we have a structure for that conversation to take place. And if you're a student and you don't have a community advisory board, but you have an idea for your study, your dissertation, your thesis, look around the university and see if there is a center or a research team that has a community advisory board. And I think people are very generous, and you can be a guest and present your idea to a board, and they will give you feedback. I always say that community advisory boards keep us honest. And I think don't wait, as Gustavo was saying, until you have your whole meal cooked. Go early, and then don't be shy. Knock on doors, and you will be surprised how many doors will open to you.
Well, I'd like to wrap up this wonderful faculty panel by thanking all of you for your time and your expertise in knowledge mobilization and bringing your personal research stories to bear here. I want to echo that this is hard, that we're all on a learning pathway or process, as graduate students, as postdocs, as faculty, as administrators, and that we will have better outcomes in engaging with society, from individuals up to countries, when we go into these interactions with 2 important ingredients: humility and empathy. The humility that you communicate to others makes you more accessible, makes them more accessible to you. The empathy is the capacity to put yourself in their position and understand the problems from their perspective. And this is, I think, true for any of our disciplines represented within the panel today, and also within all of you that are doing knowledge mobilization work in your graduate studies or postdoctoral efforts. And with that, I'd like to close the panel. Thank you.
Enrique, we do have a couple of questions in our Q&A. I know that we just have a few minutes left.
Sure.
But Barnaby is asking a question about your thoughts on the power of the intersection between knowledge mobilization and responsible research innovation.
Who would like to take that question? Barnaby Watson's question. Flavio has a small answer here. Can you expand on that, Flavio?
Well, I think it's related. It's an issue of semantics, terminology. I think all these different initiatives aim at the same thing, is to make our research relevant and to include the end users of our research in the whole process. Yeah.
Thank you. Has there been another question that we need to address?
Daniel was asking about the difference between knowledge mobilization and participatory action research. And I believe there was also a question in here about what you envision the future of tenure might look like. So if one of those jumps out more than the other, please.
Well, I think I'll jump in on the tenure one. I typed it into the chat, but I'll jump in here. So before I was the grad college dean, I was the dean of social sciences, which meant that I read the cases for over 80 promotion and tenure cases that came through the social sciences over a period of about 5 years. So I looked at a lot of P&T cases. And, you know, until the crux of the P&T case falls into the promotion and tenure guidelines that the academic units hold, and they say, you must have these things in order to be promoted with tenure, because that promotion and tenure guideline is what is shared with external letter writers, who then speak on terms of whether or not an individual has met those criteria or not. And so if those promotion and tenure guidelines have flexibility and openness to recognizing the extra work that's involved in knowledge mobilization focused research, then I'd say there's a lot of really good options. But if those are really strict, then if the review writers are good, then they will say, you know, it's fine that they did this, but it's considered extra. So it really boils down to what's in those promotion and tenure guidelines. And if somebody's on the job market, that is something that you can ask. You can say, okay, the department of whatever, can I see your promotion and tenure guidelines? And they should be willing to provide those to you.
That's a very good answer. Thank you, Libby. This is an important point. We are transforming academia in the process of doing knowledge mobilization. And the more that we get our colleagues on board, the more we get our graduate students and postdocs on board, who are the future in many cases of academia, this system will change to recognize this important work. I want to thank the panelists again. I want to thank all of you that participated in the panel, and we will see each other in our afternoon sessions of the Knowledge Mobilization Awards. Keith, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much, Enrique. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. As Enrique mentioned, we will be taking a little break here. Let me see if I can get my view correctly updated. There we go. You can see me now. So anyway, we're going to take a little break right now for, between 1 and 2 o'clock. And if you would like to rejoin us again, the link is going to remain live all day. Our next presentation from finalists is going to start at 2 o'clock, so please join us at that time. And also just another reminder that our keynote and our awards presentation will take place at 4 p.m. and that's going to feature Dr. Ronald Beghetto as well. So we will see you back here at 2 o'clock. The link will remain live, and have a great afternoon. We will see you shortly.